Good morning and welcome to you all. And thank you very much for joining this Co-Lead Agri-Info webinar on upcoming new EU rules on mineral oil hydrocarbons. Si vous voudrez suivre ceci en français, cliquez sur l'icône du monde en bas. Merci. So my name is Chris Downs, and I am Policy and Law Lead Expert at CoLead, and I will be taking you through the first part of this webinar. I will briefly introduce the Agri-Info program, and then I will be taking you through the main issues in relation to mineral oil hydrocarbons in foods. Why is the EU taking action in this area? What are the rules today? What are the rules that are currently under discussion? And then looking at the next steps and time frame for these rules. I'll then hand over to my colleague, Klaus Michael Brieber. Michael has worked for 40 years in the food oil industry and has great expertise in this area. And he will be looking more at the technical and practical aspects of this, talking in greater detail of the sources of contamination of mineral oils and talking through some of the practical mitigation strategies that can be taken to try and reduce the risk of contamination. And then we will be answering your questions. And if you want to ask a question, then please put a question in the chat, and we will try and address those at the end. I say here some answers because, of course, this is very much an area of law that is still under discussion, and that's another point I wanted to really emphasize. The EU is working on preparing rules, but this is really still an area that is under discussion. And so the idea of today is really to give you the state of play and explain where those discussions are, and give you some insights into what is going to happen. And this means that, we will not necessarily be able to answer all your questions, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will do our best to respond. And where we can't respond, then we will get back to you at a later stage. Our intention, actually, we're doing 3 of these webinars, and our intention is to collate answers to all the questions that arise, and we will send this to you by mail at a future date. Likewise, if you have questions after this webinar, if we don't cover what you're interested in, then please send an email to the address that is here. And we will be sending both the presentations and the recording of this webinar to you after the event.
Hello to everybody, also from my side. See you later.
Thank you, Michael. So really just briefly to explain Agri-Info and CoLead. So CoLead is a Brussels-based not-for-profit private sector organization. And for the last 20 years, we have been running development programs specifically in the area of agriculture and food. And this has primarily been in African, Caribbean, Pacific states. This Agri-Info program is an information program, and it is much broader. We actually have 142 low and middle income countries that are partners in this particular program. What we try and do in brief is to provide up-to-date information on all recent and upcoming changes to EU rules that have an impact on agri-food and fish value chains. And we have a website, the address is here, and that provides that information. It's an open source portal. So just to emphasize, Agri-Info is an EU-funded program, but neither myself nor Michael work for the European Commission. So this presentation does not reflect their views, although we have developed these slides in consultation with the relevant services in the European Commission. So why was Agri-Info set up? Well, if you are exporting to the EU, undoubtedly you will be aware of the number of EU rules that you have to deal with. And we estimate that the EU introduces approximately 180 new or changes to agri-food rules every year. So the first thing we do as Agri Info is really to monitor those changes and make sure that we are covering and following everything that could have an impact on your exports to the EU. Now, the EU is very transparent. There are lots of EU websites giving information on what is happening, uh, but it is quite difficult to follow this information. So the second thing we really try and do with AgriInfo is to consolidate that information, bring it all into one place so it is easy for people to follow what is happening. And the third thing we try and do is to simplify. Again, you will probably be aware that EU rules can be quite complex, difficult to follow. And so what we do with this site and with our information is to try and give clear, accessible explanations of what rules are changing and why and their implications. Every 2 weeks, we produce an update newsletter, which basically describes any changes that have occurred during the last 2 weeks. Um, we provide that information as early as possible in the policymaking process to try and give exporting countries the maximum time to adjust to changes to rules. We provide detailed guides and webinars on key topics like this one on mineral oils. And whenever you have questions on any of the changes to rules, you can always contact us by mail or via the website. So to turn to the topic, which is the subject of today's webinar, mineral oil hydrocarbons. What are mineral oil hydrocarbons? So these are compounds that are produced through the burning or refining of petroleum. And there are basically two categories of mineral oil hydrocarbons: mineral oil aromatic hydrocarbons, MOA, and mineral oil saturated hydrocarbons, MOH. And the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, has evaluated the risks if these hydrocarbons come from various sources into the food chain. And EFSA draws a distinction between these two groups of mineral oil hydrocarbons. So MOA is considered to be the more dangerous of the two. So MOA in food can potentially damage DNA and therefore may cause cancer. And so the regulators in the EU are particularly focusing on MOA and planning to develop maximum limits, or what we will refer to as maximum levels in this presentation. As regards MOSH, EFSA's view is that there are no immediate health concerns, but there is a worry that potentially exposure to MOSH may increase over time. And so there is not a discussion on maximum levels, but there is a discussion on further monitoring of MOSH and potentially other steps to reduce the presence of MOSH. Now, Michael is going to go into this in greater detail later on, but briefly, just to give you an idea, where do these mineral oil hydrocarbons come from? And one of the complexities and one of the challenges in this area is that there are multiple sources of contamination. So there is environmental contamination from exhaust gases, from motor engines, heating burners, agricultural contamination, potentially from farm machinery or pesticides. There is also the risk of mineral oils migrating from packaging, particularly jute bags, into food. And then there is also a risk during the food processing process that mineral oils seep into the food supply chain. What's the situation today? What are the rules today? So today we do not have maximum levels in law, but nevertheless, and this is something that sometimes causes confusion for exporters, action is sometimes taken against food because they contain MOA or MOSH. And this is because all food that is placed on the EU market must be safe. And this is a principle of general EU food law. that all food must be safe if placed on the market. So the question is, if you have no maximum levels, what is considered to be safe? And in the light of EFSA's evaluation, the Commission and the member states agreed a common approach to managing MOA in food and determining what is and what is not safe. And the agreement is that EU member states may take action, so they may withdraw foods or, if necessary, recall products if they detect levels of MOA in food that are above the limit of quantification. And these are on the right-hand side, you will see what these indicative levels are. And the level, as you'll see, will depend on the fat and oil content in the food. So for low fat oil content foods, the level is 0.5 milligrams per kilograms. As the fat oil content increases, then the limit of quantification also increases. So 1 milligram per kilogram for foods with a higher fat content above 4% and less than 50% fat oil content. And then 2 milligrams per kilogram for fats and oils of foods with a fat oil content in excess of 50%. What this means is that if you're exporting to the EU, there is already potentially a risk of running into trade problems. And here we see on this slide, these are the notifications to the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed. So whenever EU member states identify a risk related to food, they will report this to the European Commission, and the European Commission will circulate that information to all EU member states. And what we see from this graph that the number of controls and the number of findings of mineral oil hydrocarbons has increased quite considerably over time. Which products are we talking about here? Well, you'll see that there are a wide range of products that have been notified through the RASFF system. Primarily, the largest category are fats and oils, and this concerns a range of oils. Cereals, particularly rice, have also been highly implicated in terms of the presence of MOA. And then herbs and spices is another large category. And all these spices here, there have been findings of mineral oil hydrocarbons, which gives an indication really of the scale or potential for contamination in a wide variety of foods. Which are the countries that have been particularly reporting on mineral oils in foods? There's a high concentration in a couple of countries. So there are certain EU member states that have been particularly concerned about this sort of contamination and that have therefore done a larger number of controls, particularly Germany, Netherlands, and Belgium. And there are 11 or 12, only 11 or 12 of the member states have reported findings, which suggests that today the number of controls being taken across the EU is uneven, and there are some EU member states who are potentially today not not putting uh, mineral oil contamination high as a high priority in terms of controls, but this will potentially change over time. So that was the context today. Now, let's turn to what the EU is intending to do. And again, just to emphasize, this is really under discussion. So what we're reporting today is the state of play in those discussions. And the idea is to set maximum levels following the principle as low as reasonably achievable. This is the basic principle that applies to the setting of all contaminants. And what is as low as reasonably achievable in this context is generally the limit of quantification. And so it is the intention to set maximum levels at the limit of quantification on the following products: oil seeds and oil fruits, animal or vegetable fats and oils, but there are exceptions to that, which will come back to in a minute. Tree nuts. And when we talk about tree nuts in the EU, they are the nuts referred to below. You can see the list. Pulses, cereal grains, milk and dairy products, cocoa beans, cocoa mass, cocoa powder, and infant formula, baby foods, and cereal-based foods. There is one particularity in relation to butter. The intention, as currently discussed, is to set a 2 milligram kilogram maximum level, sorry, for butter, regardless of the actual fat content in the product. But for the other products, again, as is today the case, what the EU member states are doing, it is based on the fat and oil content in the food, with low fat oil content having a lower level of quantification. So, as already indicated, the situation is slightly different for certain animal or vegetable fats and oils. So, it is recognized for certain products. It is difficult today to meet the LOQ of 2, and therefore, for certain products, uh, meeting that LOQ is postponed until 1st of January 2030. And in the meantime, there will be a temporary higher level of of LOQ, of maximum level in the meantime. So, for example, if we take groundnut and the products listed there, in January 2027, there will be a maximum level of 6, and this will be reduced gradually over time, 4 milligrams a kilogram in 2028, with the intention of meeting the LOQ to in January 2030. And those levels, as you will see, they will vary slightly according to the product, and that will reflect the difficulty today in terms of meeting the LOQ on the basis of data that has been provided by those sectors to the European Commission. Now, there are certain products where meeting an LOQ of 2 today is particularly difficult because of the analytical complexity of the specific products. And here, we're referring to spices, dried herbs, tea and herbal infusions, instant coffee, instant tea. And for these products, the LOQ will not be 2, but will be set at 5, specifically to reflect that analytical complexity. Another type of product that is particularly difficult to analyze is food supplements. And here again, there's intention to set a higher LOQ 10 in the short term, January 2027, and then reducing over time as analytical practices techniques improve to 5 milligrams a kilogram in 2030. And therefore, just to re-emphasize this, these products, if a product does exceed these maximum levels, they cannot be placed on the market in the EU. And the idea for these products is also to take investigations in order to identify the source of the contamination. Now, for certain products, it is not the intention currently to set maximum levels. And this is because they are considered by the European Commission and by EFSA not to be a significant source of MOH. And this is particularly the case of fresh or frozen fruits, vegetables, meat, offal, fish, and seafood, coffee and tea, and herbal infusions, where that coffee and tea is intended to be used in terms of making a brew. So there is a distinction between what we saw in the last slide, which is instant coffee, which is a concentrated form of coffee, and coffee beans. So here for coffee, there is no maximum levels set, where there is an LOQ for instant coffee. There is also a There is no MLs for processed foods, vegetables, fruits, eggs, meat, offal, fish, and seafood, and essential oils, because today there is not sufficient data available on these products to be able to establish whether there is a specific need for maximum levels. Now, for these products, they may well, and this is still under discussion, but they may well be indicative levels set. And these are the indicative levels that, if they are exceeded, member states and operators will be recommended to investigate the sources of concentration, meaning that they should be sampling and analyzing the products and investigating those sources, and then reporting on the outcome of investigations. However, for these products, generally these will not these may still be placed on the EU market, even if they exceed the indicative levels. There's going to be the member states are going to be specifically encouraged to undertake monitoring of processed foods because these do typically have higher levels of contamination. And it may well be the case that the EU, on the basis of data that they collect, decide to set maximum levels in the future on some of these products. Now, so you may be wondering, well, if the EU member states can already take action today, are these maximum levels going to make a difference? Um, they are going to make a difference, maybe in a constructive way for certain products, by giving clearer rules. So there are specific levels for specific products, as we've seen, and this will provide clarity and mean that the maximum levels are more appropriate to those specific products. At the same time, there will be undoubtedly challenges. What we would expect would be that the number of controls, the frequency of controls for uh, uh, mineral oil hydrocarbons will increase across the EU. As we saw in one of the earlier slides, many of the member states today are not undertaking controls, and therefore we would expect these countries to be increasing their controls in general. It'll also mean there will be a more consistent approach to enforcement. Uh, Today, exporters may find member states taking a slightly different approach, even if they find um, mineral oils, they may decide to put products on the market, and so it can be unclear for exporters what member states are going to do. And these new rules will certainly give a more consistent approach and therefore greater legal certainty for exporters. But also, the um, we would expect there to be more demands at a commercial level. We would expect European companies to be providing or requesting suppliers to give greater evidence of compliance with MOA maximum levels. So overall, we see what we consider to be some significant impact and significant challenges for suppliers to the EU market in the sectors concerned. What is the timing foreseen? Well, as has been clear, the Commission, EU member states, they are still working on a draft regulation, and the current intention is to complete those preliminary discussions and then to notify a draft regulation to the WTO, the World Trade Organization SPS committee, in September. Now, at that point, if you are operating in a country that is a member of the WTO, there is then an opportunity for your authorities to be making comments on the proposal and passing on data, information to the European Commission that the European Commission will then take into account in the development of the final regulation. And the intention is that that regulation will be finalized towards the end of 2025, or maybe more realistically at the beginning of 2026, with the intention that the new maximum levels will apply from January the 1st, 2027. Now, we've talked, therefore, a lot about MOA, the first category of mineral oils. What about MOH, the second category of mineral oil hydrocarbons. Well, here today there are no maximum levels under discussion. Again, the exposure to MOSH does not raise particular health concerns, but there is a concern that if those levels were to increase, there could be risks for European consumers. And therefore, EU member states, they're going to be encouraged to continue to monitor MOSH. And there are, for certain products, indicative levels under discussion. And again, these are indicative. So, if these levels are exceeded, this does not mean that the products will have to be removed from the market. The idea of these indicative levels is to generate more information, have a greater understanding of where potential risks lie. And so if you export a product and the MOSH exceeds the indicative levels, then again, member states will have to do some investigations and try and determine the sources of contamination and evaluate, which systems exporters have in place in order to avoid mineral oil contamination. And the indicative levels, and I won't go through them, but you will receive the slides, so you will get a copy of these. These are the indicative levels that are under discussion. Now, all this information is in a guide. We've updated, we produced a guide last year, and that's now been updated, and it is on our website at this address. And you will find all this information and then all the links to, for example, the work of EFSA and the statements that the European Commission has made and agreed with the EU member states. All that information is in this guide, and that is downloadable from our website. So that completes the first part of this webinar, and I'll hand over to Michael, who will talk about some more of the practical and analytical challenges that you will face in relation to this new legislation. Thank you, Michael. I'll stop sharing and I'll hand over to you.
Hello to everybody. Nice to meet you here and to have the opportunity to have to present the second part of the presentation. Just a minute, please. So now I'm presenting part two, and the key question is, how could the food sectors prepare for maximum MOH levels, mineral oil, hydrocarbons levels in the EU? There is still some time to go. There is still 1.5 years to go. However, this is a short time, and there are still some things to check and some actions to do. So this is the agenda for today. First of all, who am I? I thank you, Chris, for presenting me in the beginning of your presentation. I will say some additional words concerning my person. Second point, what is the potential risk of trade after 2027? There will be one. But optimally and optimistically, what has already been done already? A lot of things have been done already. I will come to this detail later. The third point will be routes of the entry into food, how mineral oil come from the environment, come from packages, and come even from additives and from ingredients, come into the product, into the food. And we are very happy that there is a toolbox established by European associations to show you where this migration comes from. Then point 4 is what to do. So I will show you some only. You have to go into detail for that question, but I will open your eyes where it can come from with a lot of pictures and show you some practical mitigation strategies, what could be done. And last but not least, the lab, where you analyze the MOSH and MOA. You have really to take a lab and to offer the samples to a lab which have experience on this topic, MOSH and MOA, because it's very tricky. I will give you some details about that later also. And last but not least, there are also some proposals for composed food, and I don't mean composed food or processed food from fruits and vegetables. We have seen that there are no levels, but of course there are some other composed foods from ingredients which have maximum levels. And finally, number 7, questions and discussion here on the chat or question and answer channel. Klaus Michael Brieber, it's like so it's pronounced in German. I'm a quality senior expert in food questions and have over 30 years of experience in leading food industry. I've been working for quite some food processors, food producers in Europe, and I have had the position of the lead of quality, lead of development in these companies. By now, I'm an independent consultant, sort of freelancer, and I'm happy to consult you if you have questions. If you have questions after the meeting, after the webinar, or even else. So, what is the potential on trade, and what has been already been done? I will show you a very small timeline, or discuss about this timeline, what happened since 2008, when the topic popped up for the first time. In 2008, we had a food fraud with Ukrainian sunflower oil mixed with mineral oil. And there was a huge mess in the European community. And there, at that time, the whole topic popped up. And then there was a lot of points. There was even the analytics were developed further, etc., etc. But in the meantime, since 2008, quite a lot things have been done. And however, it took quite a long time until things moved on. As you can understand, some of the member states, some of the stakeholders said, oh, we cannot analyze it. And is it really a problem? And you really have to convince people that this is really a topic. So it took in the EU quite a long time until things moved on. And within Europe, you have seen that there were only 12 of the 25 countries that have reported some results and have reported actions from deviations from MOH findings. Within Europe, some countries took the topic serious and others not so much. However, it moved even there. The countries in the EU are just only one step beyond you. I have to admit they are one step, but it's only one step. So finally, because I've a lot of experience in this matter and this topic, I'm very optimistic that things can be solved step by step. We are really optimistic that they can be solved. Yeah, things must be solved by 2027. The 1st of January of 2027 is under discussion, and I'm sure that it will not be postponed too much. So take care and take it serious. And the maximum levels will come, and effectively they will have a big impact on trade into the EU. They still have today already, but at the moment they are not harmonized, and some member states take it more serious than other ones. And a very important point also, this contaminant, MOH and MOA, must be really controlled and mitigated at its source, as it cannot be really removed significantly at later steps of the process. So take the evil at the source and look where it comes from. There is no really a method and a process to kick it off later on from the product. There's one small exception. It's on refining vegetables or refining also animal-based oils, but only a small part can be removed. So even there, you have to go on the root causes of the raw materials. And how to do that? We are already at chapter number 3. The Food and Drink Europe, which is an association within Europe of the food and drink producers in Europe, they have taken the experience of other associations, and together with them, they established a toolbox for preventing the transfer of undesired mineral oil hydrocarbons into food. And this is a paper which the link of it, you have it also in the presentation, which will be shared afterwards. And this toolbox will show you a lot of mitigation paths, different mitigation paths, how mineral oil come into food, and will give you also some tips and advices how to prevent or how to minimize later on the migration of mineral oils into food. And they have established this kind of color system, and they say, okay, there are 3 different paths where the mineral oil could come into food. There is the red color, and they call it migration. And as you see it in the sign and the logo already, it's a package, what is indicated there, what is shown there. And so everything which is coming from packages or the surfaces quite around the food, they call it migration. There are quite some examples to be shown and how to be mitigated on this category, migration. Then the biggest part, they call it contamination. It's in blue. And there everything is mentioned which could migrate into the product from farm to fork. So really from the agricultural processes, from the storage and trade and transportation of the raw materials, of the seeds, of the fruits, of the processing stages, the packaging, storage, and distribution, and finally also the trade, food trade. This is what they call contamination, and they show a lot of examples where in these steps MOH and MOA could migrate from outside into the food. And last but not least, the green. It was really astonishing for me, but there are quite some additives and processing aids allowed in the EU that contain a lot of MOH and a little bit of MOA, or are even 100% of MOH. I was really astonished, but there are. I will show you these later on in my presentation. This is how the toolbox looks like. Now we start with the red color, so with migration. First off, you have one column which is named source, so where it's coming from. Then there are some more details, and the more important columns are tools. What are the tools against that? Is the 4th column, and the 5th column. There are some explaining examples how to understand that. And for migration, they say, or in the toolbox it said, mainly migration is coming from paper and cardboard and carton packagings. So from primary packaging, which is made of paper or cardbox. A lot of MOH MOA could migrate into food. Why? Because these cartons and the paper, they are produced by recycling newspaper or printed card boxes or whatever. And by this recycling, you get a lot of MOH MOA into the paper and the recycled carton, because the newspapers and the printed material, the inks of the printings are pure MOH and MOA. So by inking and by printing paper and card boxes, you add a lot of MOH MOA, and when you recycle this material into recycled card boxes and paper, you have a big contamination of MOH and MOA in your paper and card box. So what could you do? First of all, you could change from recycled material to fresh fiber products. Fresh fiber, you use then for producing your paper or cardboard, you use then fresh cellulose material and no recycled material. So this is what you could do in order to mitigate this risk. And if you have found out that this is really a risk for you, or there's a second option, you could add some barriers between the recycled paper and cardboard and the food. And there are even some plastic materials like PA and PET. You see it on the list on the notes examples column at the very bottom. And there are some materials that are really a barrier against MOSH and MOA. Of course, aluminium foil is also an effective barrier against that, but this is quite expensive, and you can use also some plastic materials like PA and PET, which are from this list the more used in practice. But let's go a little bit from the left and the right and see that not only the direct packaging are meant by this. You have also when you transport containers from the southern hemisphere of our Earth to the northern hemisphere, you have to pass the equator, and you have to pass a lot of different climate zones. And by this, there is a lot of condensate water formed in these containers. And in order to absorb this water, what do you do, or what the transporters do in the containers? They use these linings. They call it linings or dressings. They are made of cardboard, and they absorb a lot of water, condensing water, which is formed within the containers. So change this material. If it's recycled cardboard, then there is a lot of impact of the food if they are not packed in material which is a barrier. And most of the time, it's not the case. And of course, Chris has already mentioned it. The jute bags or sisal bags, they are made of, and they are also made of sisal fibers. And jute or sisal themselves, they don't contain any MOSH or MOA. But in order to make these sacks more stable and recyclable, and that you can use them for several times, they are treated with MOSH and MOA in order that the material does not get any spliss and will not be destroyed too early, in order that you have to throw them away. And MOSH and MOA, treating these sacks by MOSH and MOA, is a big risk that MOSH and MOA can migrate into the food product. You could change to vegetable oils here. This would work properly. And what the second picture, what we see here, this is a bitumen and asphalt floor. So if you store your grains or fruits or whatever, your vegetables, your cereals on these kinds of floors, there is a big matter of migration from the bitumen, which is pure MOSH and MOA, into your food. Now we are coming to the second big category of the toolbox, which is called contamination. And as I said, this is really from farm to fork. You have to look very deeply in your details, in your processes, and to find out whether you have some problematic points in your processes. First of all, MOSH and MOA could come from lubricants, from labs in food processing. They have to be food grade. If they are not, if this is really lubricants which are used also for automobiles or for tractors, you have a lot of MOSH and a lot of MOA even in this product. So what you could do, you could first of all you must change your labs from normal labs which are used broadly to H1 labs. H1 is the keyword in this context. H1 means that these labs do not contain any more. And if you want to go further, you even can use H2 or synthetic lubricants, which don't contain any MOH and anymore, and no MOH at all. However, it's not good to use these labs and then don't take care. So you have to reduce the drippings and you have to use good sealings in order that the lubrication fluid is not entering from the lubricated motor or gearbox system, etc., to your product. And you can see here in the picture, you can see a quite bad example. This, first of all, this lab, you see a bearing. It's in English, it's called a bearing in the middle of the picture. And this bearing is lapped with fat, with grease. And this grease was, first of all, was not a H1 grease, and second of all, it was so much lubricated, this bearing, that there was even some lubrication fluid or fat dripping down to the product. And as you see, there are some seeds at the bottom, and it could easily drop from upside to down. Some more examples for technical lubricants. Of course, on the field, there could be some leakages. So even through harvesters, it could be damaged. There could be some oil changes on the fields. So this is really risky. And for these harvesters, this is clear. For the motor and gear system, you won't not use any H1 oil. However, you have to take care that there are no leakages in the harvesters on the fields. And of course, you could do even some more. For example, at the stage of the transport chains, and we have a lot of examples and pictures here, there you have to change. Really, first of all, you have to minimize the lubrication of these chains. And second of all, use then H1 lubricants in order to reduce migration from this step. And on the pictures, we have here some chains, or a chain you see on the second picture in a transport belt for palm fruits, palm bushes, palm fruits. On the third picture, you see this is an olive oil production, and there you see that that the gearbox and the motor is quite situated right above these gearbox. And if there are some droppings, it will drop, and the ceilings are not tight, and there is a possibility that mineral oil or H1 oil could drop from above to down. It will go directly on the transported goods. Here in this case, olives. And on the fourth picture, you see a kind of tractor, which a big fork on the front, and this is to shake the olive trees in order to harvest them. And you see there a lot of hydraulic tubes and hydraulic gadgets, and they could be also leaking. And then you have leaking, and then you have hydraulic oils which are not H1 on the product, in this case olives. And the last picture on the right, on the bottom right, you see a truck, and this truck is loading or unloading seeds from the field, and the truck is then levering the transport bench, and then the seeds are falling down and through a grid on the bottom. And if there are leakages of this truck from their motor parts, from the gearboxes, etc., because these trucks normally they are well maintained, but could happen, then you have a contamination of MOH in this step also. But don't reduce it on these points. There are some more points. First of all, if you are using compressed air in order to transport your food, like grains, like flour, like seeds, etc., then take care that your compression unit of your compressed air is working on a zero emission on a oil reduced or without oil system. There are compression units that don't use that are working without the lubrification. And there are standards, you see it on the note at the right, which which compression systems are suitable to produce compressed air, which is not polluting your product. Also, if you have on the fields, if you burn weeds or grass or etc. in order it's a agricultural practice to do so in some parts of the world. And then you have exhaust fumes, and they are not only CO2, they are also burning stuff from the weeds and from the grass. And this is also MOH, which is formed in the smoke. And if you have a field at the neighborhood, and there you have still some grains on the field, you will have an intake and a pollution of MOH and MOA early on in the early stage of the field. And on the right, you see a processing step, which is called the drying of coconut fruits in order to make coconut copra and then to press it to coconut oil. And this is burned directly, or it's heated and it's dried with combustion gases from the burning of coal and other burning material. And this is a big risk on the coconut process to spoil your coconut with MOH and MOA. Even with polyaromatic hydrocarbons, but the polyaromatic hydrocarbons, you can get them out by raffination with active carbon. But at the moment, with the raffination of vegetable oils, it's hard to kick off the MOH and the MOA. There is only some reduction of some 10 to 30% in total, but not more at the moment. And some more technical lubricants, once again. Storage areas and floors. You have seen this point also in migration at the point where you had the packaging influence, and I showed you there the bitumen and asphalt floor. But even if you have a concrete floor, and you see it on the picture right on the right side, you have some traces of tractors at the concrete. There could be also some oil spoilings from the tractors which were placed there between the harvest seasons. And if you have then the seeds lying at the concrete floor, which is spoiled with mineral oil, you will have a contamination. And what is practice for intensive cultivating and harvesting olive? You see it on the left, on the bottom left. This is a tractor which is harvesting olives, and this tractor has an exhaust fumes, and you have to take care and you have to take measure that these exhaust fumes will not spoil the olives. This is a middle risk, I would say, but the high risk is the second picture. If you trim your olive trees at the same moment when still are fruits on the olive trees, and this guy here is trimming the olive trees and cutting the olive trees with a motor-driven saw. It's a diesel-driven saw, and the exhaust fumes will for 100% sure, they will spoil the olives hanging on the same tree, or even hanging on the neighbor tree, and even hanging on the neighbor field of trees. So do this trimming of trees with a saws, either with electrical gadgets, but this is a little bit complicated, or separate it by time. Do it after the harvest, when the olives have already been harvested and have been transported to the mill. And on the downside, the last two pictures, you see some situations where you could check also, or you can imagine also with these tractors that that's a situation of palm oil, where olive oil could come into the fruit. But this is not the main impact for palm fruits. But if you have dripping tractors here, this is really also a risk. So take care about your transport and your tractors, what you have, that they are well maintained. Now we come to the green color, another sources of contamination. There are really additives or processing aids where MOH and MOA is coming from. They consist really on MOH, and some of them also MOA. For example, dust control agents. On the picture here on the right side, above on the right side, you see soy crush. It's coming from Southern America, it's coming from Northern America and other parts of the world. And in order that these crush, when you transport it with pneumatic air or transporting belts, etc., is not dusting too much, then they spray mineral oil on that. And you don't get this mineral oil out of the vegetable oil again. So take care about that. If you do it, just use mineral oil, which is consisting 100% of MOH, in order to have no more later in this product. But there is also some pesticides formulation. This is the next picture, this bottle on the field there. It's a picture with a pesticide in a bottle. And there are some pesticides where the carrier and the main, not the pesticide itself, but the solution agent of the pesticide and the carrier is based on mineral oil, in order that the whole formulation is sticking better on the plant when it's applied. You have to ask your producers of pesticides if you have pesticides which consist of a mineral oil as a carrier. And last but not least, there are also some release agents, some waxes, etc. They are, if they are produced from vegetable materials, they are no MOH more, but they behave like MOH more, and they are analyzed as MOH. So if you analyze them, you will find them as MOH, and you get into discussion with your customer. However, if it's not waxes from plant-based, from vegetable-based, and there are some waxes directly coming from mineral oils, which is also practiced, then you have a real problem. And the picture on the bottom, these are avocados, and if these avocados are used for selling the fruits itself, for the shops, then to make them look better and more nicer, then they are waxed. And if these fruits come because they come back, they are recycled and they come into the production of avocado oil, and you don't use the fruits without waxes, then you will have also a migration of these waxes in the avocado oil, as an example. And here you have a list of ingredients, so of additives. They are added directly in small quantities to our food. And these additives with an E number, they are allowed in adding them to special foods. And these additives are either MOH or they are waxes, carnauba or candelilla and beeswax. They are from vegetable or from animal origin, and they are analyzed as MOH. Take care and look to them. For additives, a maximum level is already under discussion or still under discussion, because this is real problematic. But we have to focus now on the normal ingredients at the moment. So what can we do? What can you do? Or what have we already done in the EU? And even in the EU, some member states and some processors have to do a lot of work in the remaining 2 years. So all shareholders of the food industry must really focus with tremendous effort on mitigating these risks in their own process. So look first in your own fabrication, in your own plant, whether you have lubrication, packaging issues, or leakages somewhere. And if you have if you have found out that there is no, then focus on communicating with your suppliers worldwide, because we have a global food chain in the moment. And then it's really important to mitigate the risk with the willing suppliers. Don't talk too much and don't discuss too much with suppliers who tell you, oh, the EU is implementing some nasty values, some nasty maximum levels here for MOH and MOA. I'm not willing anymore to export to the EU. I will export to China, India, or the US. They don't have any values under discussion at the moment. If you are discussing with these suppliers, you will have no chance. Only focus on those who are really interested on continuing exporting to the EU. You have to identify those, and you have to identify those suppliers and products. Sometimes it happens that you have a product from supplier number A, where you don't find any MOH and more, and if you get it from supplier number B, you find something. So you have to identify the supplier product company combination. This is really risky. And Chris has already shown you a cake diagram where he has shown you the more risky and the less risky categories of food. What can be done there? Then you can problem auditing at those suppliers, or call it a visit, or call it a discussion with the suppliers, and beginning with those that are willing and cooperating. And then what you do there together with them, because they know best their processes, show them these pictures, show them where it could come from, and then together with the supplier, do some step testing and analytics from farm to delivery. What does it mean, step testing and analytics? That means that you cut his process into different parts, and you say, okay, you have the entry of the good, you have the processing of the good, you have the second processing step of the good, etc. And you have to take samples after each of these big steps. I will show you this in 3 examples now on the following pages. The first example is linseed and flaxseed from Kazakhstan, and the seed is delivered to Germany and then pressed in Germany to linseed or flaxseed oil. And the steps in Kazakhstan are harvesting, unloading, sieving, then drying if the harvest was too late and the weather was already nasty and there was some snow or raining, and storage. And the steps in Germany then are pressing of the seeds and filling it in IBCs or in bottles. And here you see the different steps and where you could take some samples after each step. The first step is the harvesting at the field, and you have here some harvest cars, some harvest equipment. There could be some drippings and some leakages from this machinery. You take the seeds from this step, and then it's transported to the mill, or transported not to the mill. It's transported to the cleaning equipment, to the cleaning plant. And there you could take another sample, as there is the risk of the truck where because of bad lubrication of the truck at the downside, there could be some much more entering here. Then you have the cleaning step. And as I've shown you the picture already in the toolbox, there could be some leakages of the lubrication in the bearings. And this was really, in this case, was the case. So there, in this case, where we tested it in this location, really this was the main risk. Afterwards, after the cleaning, you could have an indirect drying step. Indirect means that you have combustion gases from diesel or from fuel. These combustion gases are not used directly to dry the seeds, but these combustion gases are used in a second circuit to heat clean air. And this clean air then is is drying the seeds. And if this is not done properly, if it's directly dried, you could have an impact and a mitigation of mineral oils right here also. And then the last picture you've also seen already. There could be some spoiling about lubs and mineral oils that are situated on the concrete floor from storing any cars or tractors during from in the season between harvesting and new harvest on these floors. A second example would be coconut from the Philippines. And I do show you all these pictures in order to sensibilize you where these things could come from. This is the purpose of showing you all this. And here we have coconut oil from the Philippines. The raw oil is pressed in the Philippines or Malaysia themselves directly. And the refining step sometimes or mainly is in Europe. So the steps in the Philippines are harvesting, cracking the nuts, then drying the meat. We have seen a picture already about from this process also. The dried meat, it's called copra, and the copra then is pressed, and then you have the raw oil, and this raw oil then mainly is then transported to refining in filling in Europe. Can also be refined in the Philippines or Malaysia, but a big quantity of them is refined and in Europe. The first step is at the field. There is no contamination of anything of mineral oils on the field. I didn't see anything there. And the second step, you crack the nuts. You do it also. You do it then at the plant, at the production plant. You crack the nuts. You do it sometimes also on the field, but you do it mainly in the production plant. And then these cracked nuts, they are dried. And if you have sun, this is the picture on the right side, then this drying is with sun heat. There are some other risks of microbiological contamination, but there is for sure no moshmoa risk on the right side when you dry it with sun. But if you have to dry these fruits and these nuts when it's raining, then you have to dry it and with exhaust fumes, and it's dried there with these ovens, which you see on the pictures number 3 in the middle. And there you have a direct drying with exhaust fumes, and this is really spoiling the copra. There is a lot of intake and a lot of migration of moshmoa from the direct combustion gases into the product. So what you could do, and this is the picture here on the left side, you could use some indirect drying ovens, as you have seen it in the picture with the flaxseed or linseed indirect drying. There are already some production plants which use the indirect drying. So the combustion material like coal or wood or whatever, which is burning, the gases, they are heating a second separated circuit of air, and then this clean air is drying the coconuts. Where it could also come from is from these polyethylene sacks, but normally polyethylene sacks, they are fine. There is no migration of mosh and moa. But if they are really spoiled with oil or coal or whatever you see here, because they are so black, then there could be a contamination. And finally, by pressing the copra in these expeller presses, there could be some leakages of lubrication at that step here. And I will show you on the next picture what you could do here. In the middle, you have 2 technical pictures of these expeller presses. On the upper picture, you see on the right side of the bearing, there's a plate in the middle, and there's a bearing or the sealing. There's a sealing in the middle, and this is separating the gearbox and the motor part of the expeller press from the pressing chamber where the coconut copra is pressed. And this you see on the left side. So if you have a good bearing in the middle, which is avoiding any dripping and any passing of mineral oil from the right side to the left side into the pressing chamber, you do everything right. Or even better, this is the picture, the second picture of a technical drawing here. You have the motor and the gearbox on the right side, also on the right side, but it's really separated. There is some air in between. It's only the um, the turning part is the connection, but the motor driven part with the motor which is above and these gearbox parts is on the right side, and they are physically separated from the pressing chamber, which you see in the middle or at the little bit on the left side of the picture. So in this case of the coconut, really the exhaust fumes of direct drying and a little bit leakage in the expeller presses was the main cause of contamination of MOH of the coconut oil. Last but not least, olive oil from Southern Europe could also come from Africa or from Syria or from Turkey. So it's harvested and pressed over there in Southern Europe or in the other countries, and there where it's done, the whole process is taking place: the harvesting, the collecting, the milling, the malaxation. You have here fruit and fruit oil producing out of that. So you need a special step which is called malaxation, and then you centrifuge this pulp, and then you centrifuge the water from the oil phase, and then you filter everything in order to get a clear oil, and you have a decanting step even still in the tank where the water, still there is some water which is being separated from the oil phase. And the pictures, you might already know them already. You have these exhaust fumes by the harvesting machines, which could spoil, or you have these hydraulic systems of these harvesters. These are really these tractors which shake the trees, and by shaking the trees, the olives fall down, and you could have some leakages over here. And the bad example I've shown you right away also is by trimming the trees, the olive trees or other trees, by these motor-driven saws, which produce a lot of exhaust fumes. You can do that, but you must not do that during the harvesting period. When the harvesting has been finished and the fruits have been transported to the mills, then you can do it with this gadget, but not in the meantime, because even if you have a neighbor field, you have a huge production of these exhaust fumes, and this will spoil or give some traces of mineral oil and MOH and MOA in your olive oil. And jute bags, we have already talked about that. This is the material or the oil which is used for keeping these jute bags or sisal bags more stable in order that you can reuse them for several times. This is going directly from the jute bags into the product. And here you have some more technical devices, some good and some bad examples. For example, on the picture here on the in the middle upside, you see that on this gadget, on this transporting system on the left, you see the motor. The blue motor is on the top. So if there is some dripping, it will drip directly into the product floor. And here you see some malaxer and presses. Malaxer is that after destroying the olives and giving you a kind of pulp with the kernels and the meat, and then you mix it in order that the oil is separating and getting more and more and bigger drops. And this is the step where it's coming from. And if the the machinery of the malaxer, if the ceilings, if the motor is dripping into the room of the malaxer, then you have a problem. And there you have some presses, and this is the same issue and story with the presses. When where you have leakages. Sorry, these are centrifuge, what you see here on the right side. So, as in the beginning, I already mentioned that you take from every main step of your process, you take a sample, and you take the sample and you send it to an external lab, because normally you are not capable to do these analytics on your own. You must be very experienced on doing so. I will come later on this topic of experience lab. But you take a sample after each major step of your process. And let's say this is the example from the sesame seed, from the flax and linseed from Kazakhstan. We have taken a sample from the field, which is the result here on the left. And what do you see? You don't see anything. The figures which are relevant here is the figures MOH, POSH, C10 to 50. So these are all the fractions of MOH from the chain lengths from 10 to 50, which is relevant. And what do you see? It's smaller than 0.6. So under the level of detection, LOD. And the second figure which is relevant is nearly the last one. You see it on the bottom of the left side. It's more C10 to 50. And what do you see there? Smaller than 0.15. So smaller than level of detection. So nothing has been detected. And then we took another sample after the truck. And what did we see? We didn't see anything. Nothing has been detected. But then later on, I showed you the nice picture of the cleaning machine there, where you had the sealing and the lubrication of the sealing. There we found traces in the sesame seed. And here you find MOSH C10 to C50, MOSH POSH C10 to C50. You find of 7.4. Oh, you will say, okay, this is smaller than 15 or whatever, what could be the MOSH indicative level. But if you press this linseed, then this MOSH will go directly into the oil phase. So the figures in the oil will be higher than 7.4. But what is really problematic, sorry, I switched too early, is the MOA content here, what we found here after the cleaning step of the seed. And you see at the bottom line, you see MOA C10 to 50, you see 3.2. And this is really problematic, because when it's then pressed to oil, the figure will even increase the double, and even 3.2, as we have seen for maximum levels, is higher than 2. We have levels, or even for seeds which have a lower content of fat, you are at 1 or even lower. So 3.2 is much above the proposed maximum levels for these oil seeds. Okay, now you have taken your samples and you want to send these samples to a lab. What do? You look on the internet, who can do that for you, but take care. A lot of labs, because of the fact that this topic is now 15 years old, at least 15 years old, a lot of labs have implemented these methods of analyzing MOSH and MOA, but only some of them are really experienced. Is it helping you if you get some labs where you get figures and you get results which are too low or too high? In both ways, it won't help you. So you have to really, this analytics are really tricky. And what is tricky about here? So the labs must be extremely experienced in order to find the right result. So not overestimations or underestimations. And the best labs, due to the longest experience we have, they are based in Europe. And I will do no any advertising for these labs, but take these big labs, which the big guys worldwide operating, and in the meantime, they make a good job. And in the meantime, also, their dependencies in Asia, they are also already make a good job. But as we talk now here, mainly to Southern America, please send your samples to your partner, perhaps your customer, via your customer or your partner in Europe to these big labs. And after the webinar, if you ask, I can give you also some good tips about how you do and how you proceed there. What they all do for the normal and the sophisticated of the normal and the experienced method, they have this GC-LC method. GC means gas chromatographic, and there is a second step of liquid chromatography, and then the detector is a flame ionized detector, and this is an online method. It is according this nice norm. It's a ISO norm in the meantime, so a worldwide valid norm. And what do? They solve out the oil phase or the oil phase out of your food, and then they press it. They make it soluble, and then they press it to these two chromatographs, to the gas chromatograph and to the liquid chromatograph. And in the detector, in the FID detector, you will find these nice hump, which you see on the green picture above, a hump, and that there are a lot of spikes on there. And the hump, this is the content of MOH, and the same with MOA. The spikes, they are coming from organic, or they're coming from biogenic substances. So what they must do is, in order not to integrate the hump plus the spikes, they have to cut off these spikes, and they do it by a step which they call epoxidation. So prior to the GC-LC FID online method, they have an oxidation step. And if they do it properly, they have this nice hump, which is in light green on the bottom. And this could be integrated, and this is a good result. If they're doing too less, then there will be some spikes already on the hump, and the result will be overestimated. And if they do it too extremely, the epoxidation step, they will even raise the hump, make it to a smaller hump, and then the results will be underestimated. So this is very tricky. And so use really the big guys operating mainly in Central Europe. And if you have other problems, and I show you this nice picture, which is really very technical, but it's like this. In the left picture, you see a realistic hump, and I'm showing you, or I will say the hump which is under consideration for MOH and MOA is the hump which is marked dark green and yellow. And what you see there is not a nice hump. It's mainly like a hat, or formed like a hat. So it's not a perfect curved hump as you have seen it on the last picture. And you see a lot of spikes. Okay, the spikes could be erased by epoxidation, but then even the hump is not a nice Gaussian form type of hump. So there is some overlapping of other material which is coming where from, we don't know. And this can be also then be analyzed and identified via a new method, which is called, it's complicated, but I will read it, LC-GC-X-GC-TOF-MS-FID method. And here you see in the red color, you see the hump, which is then really more. But then a little bit down, you see other fields which cause these deviations on the perfect hump. On the left side, on the green part, and on the yellow part, you see some deviations on the top. And these are caused by terpenes. Terpenes are, for example, by terpenes, could be others also. And these are substances which come originally from the plant. So this is not more. And by doing so, you could then say, okay, originally I had 3.1 milligram more, which is above normal maximum levels. And if you identify then that a part of this 3.1 milligram per kilogram is not MOA, but is terpenes, then your result could be 1.9 in this example and could be a limit at the limit, but still fine. However, this method is advanced, very costly, and time consuming. So only do it if you have results which must be rediscussed. If they are too high, or your laboratory says, oh, the hump is not looking too nice, we have to do this kind of method. The typical and the good method is the first one which I described. This is not costly. It's not too costly. It's not quick, but in 5-6 days the laboratory must do it, must do the job, and then normally everything is fine. Only in cases where the results have to be discussed because they are too high or the hump does not look very nice, then ask the laboratory if they can do this additional method. Finally, some details about proposed EU maximum levels for composed food, and I'm not talking about composed or processed food from fruits or vegetables, which Chris has already named because there are no maximum levels. But if you have composed or processed food from ingredients that will have maximum levels. So how to calculate maximum levels for composed food, which are made from ingredients where maximum levels will be established. And this is still under discussion, but most probably it will come like this. Until 2030, and this is according to the Article 3 of our contaminant regulation, 2023/915, you can calculate it as follows. On the basis of the ingredient composition, the maximum levels for the ingredients, and even if you have appropriate dilution or concentration factors. I give you one example. If you have a mixture of two oils, let's say 50% of sunflower oil and 50% of sesame oil, these two ingredients will have maximum levels. And then we look at the tabella with the maximum levels. We will see that sunflower oil is this is in 5.5 to 1. Maize, rapeseed, sunflower, etc. oil, this will have a maximum level of 2.0. And then there is sesame oil, and then we look in the tabella and see, okay, there is under 5.5.2.2, there is sesame oil, and this will have a maximum level of 6 in the beginning of 20 and 27. And you could calculate when you are in the first quarter of 27, you could calculate it according to the weighted composition. So 50% of 2 milligram per kilogram plus 50% of 6. So you, for this mixture of sunflower oil and sesame oil, you will have a maximum level, a calculated maximum level of 4 milligram per kilogram. But in 2030 onwards, as already all these exceptions will then be away. From 2030 onwards, logically, the maximum levels for those composed foods, they will only be derived from the fat content. And you know already these different maximum levels. If you have a product with more than 50% fat and oil, these maximum level for the composed foods will be at 2 milligram per kilogram. If you have medium foods with medium content of fat and oil, or let's say a higher content of fat or oil, between 4 and 50, it's 1 milligram. And you have low fat oil containing food, you less than 4% of fat oil, the maximum level will be at 0.5 milligram per kilogram. So quite an hour, my presentation. It was a lot of stuff, and I'm happy that we come in the last part, and I open my camera that you can see me again. Now it's time for questions, for discussion, your questions, and for discussion.
Thank you very much, Michael. We have had a few questions